Thank you, everyone. And I'm happy to be the first speaker in the last section. So maybe I should begin by congratulating all of you for surviving so far and attending the last session. I'm going to talk today about, maybe take a different angle about privacy engineering and focus more about the M&A, the mergers and acquisitions perspective. I will share some of my experience and how we leverage privacy engineering in order to make the acquisition process more efficient, how we streamline the process. Before that, will introduce myself and say a few words about myself and about the team I'm leading. I'm part of a team called Privacy M&A. We're responsible for running privacy assessments of acquisitions. Every time Google acquires a company, we're involved in the due diligence process. I'm often asked if we are only involved pre-close or post-close, so the answer is both. Pre-close, we are responsible for identifying the pre-close conditions and thinking about maybe the integration costs and working with the deal sponsors in order to inform them and educate them, and I will touch all of this in a second. But we're also involved post-close, and post-close, what we do, we work with those acquisitions on mitigating those gaps and helping them with remediating the issues that we find throughout the process. And those two parts are very different. They complement each other, and I will, as I mentioned, I will touch all of them in a few minutes, and I will explain how we leverage the privacy engineering practice and the privacy engineers in order to do so. The key point I want to make in this presentation, and the reason why we wanted to come and present, is that if in the past we saw the mitigation process of acquisitions as a program management challenge, right? We were mostly program managers, and we thought about how we introduce the policies to acquisitions and how we communicate the policies to acquisitions and help them mitigate. Now we are thinking about it through the lens of privacy engineering, which means at least three things. One is that we hired privacy engineers, and we have privacy engineers in our team now, not only program managers. Two, our approach is much more hands-on. We are not only telling the acquisitions what they need to do and highlight the gaps, we actually work with them and we show them the ropes and we give them the best practices and we work with them, and I'll show a few examples in a second. And the third point, and it was actually touched in the previous talks today, we are using tools. We are using machine learning tools. We are using Gen AI tools in order to simplify and speed up and improve the processes. And all of this becomes available and relevant because we have privacy engineers. So this was a long introduction, and now I want to dive into the topics. I will begin by sharing the common challenges we face when we think about acquisitions and why the acquisition domain is such an interesting challenge from the privacy point of view. And then I'll share some mitigation principles. Every acquisition is different. We never see the exact same troubles, the exact same issues, the exact same challenges. And this is why we really have to have those mitigation principles to keep consistency and to have some guidelines that we can follow when we work with acquisitions. I'll share a few words about our mitigation process, give a concrete example, and I will conclude my talk with some words about the impact and where we see that we are most impactful and what can we learn from this. And I want to begin with this. I think this is a very, very interesting, I would say, overview of the key things we hear from acquisitions, the key, I wouldn't call it complaints, but the key challenges acquisitions face when they join Google and we introduce ourselves, and sometimes they see us and say, oh, trouble, because we are the ones to tell them what are the key privacy challenges they'll have to face and what they'll have to deal with in the coming months of the integration process. So the first thing we hear from them is we do not maintain user data inventory, which is a nice way to say we don't really know what user data we collect. And we hear it, an interesting point is that we hear it from both small companies and big companies. We hear it from all kinds of companies across different industries. And it means that the challenges, the key challenge we are facing is to help them identify where their user data is, what type of data they collect, where they store it, What happens if third parties store it? Sometimes they are not the one who collect and gather the data. Sometimes they work with third parties. Sometimes they need to do some cleanup because we keep one of our key principles is data minimization, and we cannot allow multiple copies of the same data. So a lot of work, even before we begin the privacy mitigations, even before we talk with them about access management and retention and encryption, we need to begin by understanding where the data is, what type of data they collect, and where the data resides. The second point we hear from them all the time is we're coming from a very different culture, right? Which means they have different policies, they have different, the most important thing they have a different set of intuitions. Things that might be trivial for us, and Google, you can assume, has, I think, the highest standards, or among the highest standards when it comes to privacy. They are coming from different companies, and not always they share the same standards, the same requirements, and it means that they come with a significant privacy debt that we need to address, and sometimes it takes months to address this debt, and definitely this is not trivial, and we need to make sure that we help them develop, and I'll talk about it, to train them and develop those intuitions that will enable them not only to follow our guidelines and our requirements, but to be on their own and to be able to make the right decisions when we are not there. Another thing we hear, we are still updating the integration plan. Now, you can assume that when Google acquires a company, we do have a rationale, right? We do have an acquisition rationale, and we do have, I would say, an initial integration plan. But this always changes, right? We're in a constant change when it comes to acquisitions, and we cannot do privacy mitigations without a clear understanding about the integration plan, because they can move to GCP, they can move to Google's internal systems, and we have to understand the context, which means that our job is always being done under a lot of uncertainty, and we need to be nimble, and we need to find a way to define some clear principles, some clear assumptions, but also to be ready to be flexible when those circumstances change. And the last point, they're telling us we are overwhelmed with so many tasks, because when we come with our privacy requirements and we tell them, this is what you need to do, and if you can do it by yesterday, it would be great. We are not the only ones, right? Because they were just acquired by Google, and now they need to show results, they need to show revenues, and the product roadmap is probably the most important thing they see in front of them when we come with privacy. So when we hear this from acquisitions, and all of them share this with us, we do two things. One, we do try to convince them that privacy should come first, because if they will not if they will not address the privacy gaps very early in the process, they will be blocked. The moment they will try to do something to launch a new feature or something like this, they will be blocked if they don't deal with the privacy gaps. But another thing we're trying to do, and I'll talk about it more, we are not there to tell them what they are not able to do. We are not there to stop or block them. We are enablers, right? So we are really trying to say, okay, those are your priorities, this is what you need to do, let's work together and see what we can address today for you to be able to launch this feature tomorrow. And being enablers and not just saying what you cannot do is one of our most important principles. So speaking about principles, I told you that even though every acquisition is different, we do have some mitigation principles that are consistent across all acquisitions. I will touch them briefly, and I will try to explain how privacy engineers and privacy engineering as a practice is relevant for each of them. The first thing is privacy by design. I don't need to explain it because it's obvious. But in acquisitions, privacy by design means that we need to be involved with the privacy team. We need to be involved as early as possible, on day one and sometimes before day one, when the suggestion to acquire a company is raised for the first time, for us to be able to maybe surface potential privacy risks, but also to start thinking with the deal sponsors about the implications of the integration, maybe talk about the costs. When deal sponsors think about acquisitions in terms of costs, they think about the money they need to pay for the acquisition. But privacy mitigations should also be taken under account because it's also part of the process, right? But another thing about privacy by design, and I mentioned this, privacy by design is also when you work on an acquisition, you should also tell them why we require some of the things we require. It's insufficient to tell them you need to have a retention plan or you need to restrict the access. When you explain the why, you kind of help them develop those intuitions that I mentioned earlier, and you help them understand how Google works, why the policy is written like this, and what we are trying to achieve. And by this is very important for us, because by this, you are supporting, you're enabling them to continue thinking and working and following the policies, even if we are not working with them anymore. So this is what what enables the continuity even after we are done with our involvement. Risk management, obviously very, very important. First of all, to define the risk. I think this is probably the most challenging part, to understand what is the risk we are trying to identify, what is the risk we are surfacing, and then how we can address it, how we can mitigate it. Now, one thing is for sure, not all the risks can be mitigated. And in many, many cases, we need to talk with the acquisitions about trade-offs and about compensating controls. This is the art of what we're doing. And also, we need to explain what's going to be, what's the residual risk after they are going to mitigate it and after they're going to use one of the compensating controls, what else will remain. And obviously, privacy engineers in our team are highly involved in defining the risk, in mitigating it. When I talk about cross-function mitigation, what I really mean is that it's not only privacy. We sit together privacy and security and compliance and legal and also the sponsors. It's a joint effort, because in most cases, it's not enough to talk only about privacy. You cannot really fix a privacy problem if you don't have a security guy in the room to tell you what are the security implications. And in many cases, you need the product counsel, the legal advice there. So it's really about generating this synergy between the different counterparts. Best practices, of course, we do not dare to reinvent the wheel for every acquisition. It's very, very important for us to learn from each acquisition and see what we can take and what we can leverage. And this is also very important when it comes to tools, because Google is a very big company, and if we hear that there's another team who's using a very efficient privacy tool that can help with retention, that can help with access management, we definitely want to make sure that we can utilize the same tool, to utilize the same method in order to help acquisitions. And clear transitions. We believe that every team who is focused on privacy M&A should see, we see ourselves as urgent care. We are there to fix the immediate, riskiest, most important problems, but we cannot help acquisition fix everything, and we cannot work with acquisitions for 5 years. We are there for 6 months, maybe for a year, maybe a year and a half, and then we need to make sure that the acquisitions is equipped with the knowledge and tools to continue and working with their own sponsors. How we work, how the mitigation process works. We begin pre-close, as I already mentioned, with identifying the key problems, thinking about the integration process, training the acquisitions about what needs to be done. Then the deep dives, this is what we do post-close. In the deep dives, we learn more about what the acquisition is doing, and we provide them with the knowledge and tools that will help them really mitigate the key gaps that we identified. Then we started to use more and more privacy tools. This is a key point. We held fascinating talks earlier about how to leverage LLMs and generative AI and machine learning. We definitely use those tools for privacy for acquisitions. We see it more and more. It can really save time and be much more efficient. Remediation, as I said, a hands-on approach. We work with the acquisitions. We show them the ropes. It's not our previous approach that was just based on telling them what they need to do and tracking this. Now we are part of this process, and we are giving them those best practices and then monitoring. By using tools and by using a hands-on approach and using best practices, we are now able to come to acquisitions and not just tell them, listen, you need a retention plan or you need to restrict the access. What we can tell them is that in your GCP BigQuery, 53% of the tables are not well restricted. When you look at your SQL, you need to strengthen your controls. So we are able to be much more granular and more concise when it comes to the gaps and how to mitigate them. And this is a huge advantage. Now, I wanted to give an example. I was very high level so far, but I wanted to give a specific example. Let's say that we have a customer support agent, and they require access to user data. This happens very often. Usually, those customer support agents are third party, right? They are coming from a different company. How do we think about this issue, and how do we help acquisitions to mitigate this? We begin with consent. We think about who should give a consent to this customer support agent to log in or to access the user data. We look at the privacy policy to ensure that the fact that the customer support agent accesses the data is written and clear to the customers, because we definitely don't want the users to be surprised. We ensure that users have the controls. If they don't, if they want to opt out from this, they can do it. Then we look at this from the access point of view to make sure that the customer agent really has temporary access, and it is well logged, and it is provisioned, and retention to make sure that the data they have access to is not everything, data minimization, and we keep only the data that we need, and so on and so on. We do this for every use case. And this can only be available to us. This can only happen if the privacy engineers we have in our team are well aware and well informed about what the company is doing, but also that they work very closely with the companies, with the acquisitions, to ensure that we are not missing anything. And the last slide I want to present to you today before we open it up for questions, we asked acquisitions in the past few months, what do they see as the most impactful contributions that we give them as a privacy M&A team? And those are the results that we saw in the survey. And I wanted to mainly focus on the top three here. They were telling us, you help us feel that we are on track, because we provide them with the clarity and prescriptive guidelines and very clear and concise instructions and expectations that really help them understand what they need to do, especially when they are overwhelmed and have all kinds of conflicting priorities. The second point is they really appreciate the fact that we review their design documents, and this might sound very technical, but when you think about it, when we review their designs, when we review their plans, when we really go deep and provide them with the context, this is where they feel that they get the most out of what we can provide them with. And the last point is that we help them prioritize. When we tell them, listen, everything is important, but in your specific case, given the risks that we identified and analyzed, and given your integration plan, and given our experience from different acquisitions, those are your top three. And no one else can do it for them. I mean, one day, hopefully, they'll be able to do it themselves with their experience. But at the beginning, when they are so overwhelmed and they are new to Google and they're new to this new language and new concepts, it's very important that someone will be able to prioritize this for them. The bottom line of what I was trying to say is that I think the biggest change we are experiencing and seeing in the privacy M&A domain is really the transitioning from being at arm's length and looking at this as a program management problem to become much more involved, leveraging privacy engineering practices, including tools, experience, and hands-on mitigations. That's it.